Good afternoon. Thanks for joining, everybody. Welcome to our new webinar in collaboration with PEFC on EUDR. We're going to walk you through all the steps required to comply with the upcoming regulation being enforced in 1 year from now, and show you how LiveEO and PEFC together are offering a solution that can really soften and smoothen your compliance journey in the coming year. With me on stage, there are two colleagues, and so I'm gonna present them to you. So Rob Shaw, he's the Head of Standards and Integrity at PEFC, and Chris Bell is our Senior Product Manager for TradeAware, the solution we're gonna walk you through that will help you comply with EUDR. You're going to have the possibility in the bottom right corner to add questions, and we will answer them in written form or at the end of the presentation. Chris will moderate for us, and we'll select a sample and answer all your doubts and concerns. So yeah, please, you can add anytime your questions. We're going also to circulate this material, the recording, at the end of the call. So no need to take notes. You're going to have access to everything you need. Perfect. Then we can kick it off. This is our essentially the journey that we're taking you on. We're going to focus on the first 3 bits because that's where what comes first chronologically, what you have to take care of first to comply with this regulation. The remaining two parts will be addressed in the upcoming webinars. So step number 1 will be essentially the preparation of all the geolocations, right? This is a key requirement to prove that deforestation or land use change or degradation have not happened where you sourced your timber or commodity of reference. Step number 2 will be about connections with your suppliers and buyers. As we know, this is a multi-tier regulation that does not just impact the users of potentially this platform, but their suppliers as well. And they all have to come together, collaborate, share this evidence to essentially comply with the regulation and present the due diligence statement. And finally, we're going to present to you today the methodology and how in TradeAware we take care of the risk assessment piece, which is the crucial part of this regulation, essentially to make sure that what you import into the EU is free of deforestation and follows all the local regulations. On the left-hand side, you will see the QR code that will take you to our landing page where you can sign up to the essentially the joint offering PEFC plus TradeAware. We prepared a package for the members of for the members of PEFC. So we can move on to the next slide. And this is to summarize what LiveEO and PEFC come together for. We understand that PEFC's position, knowledge, and presence in the market is key to ensure mass adoption of the tools that EUDR requires. And thanks to their advice and consulting, we at TradeAware built a tool that addresses all the requirements of the regulation. So you will see how we will touch on the geospatial bit, on the legal bit, and the data sharing, all these components that are challenges for many reasons because there isn't a tool that addresses it all at once. And so this is what this partnership is for, to ensure that the requirements of PEFC are incorporated in LiveEO's TradeAware platform, and we can enable as many of you to navigate these challenges upcoming next year. We can move on, and I'll leave it to Rob to talk about how PEFC is helping all of you navigate these challenges.
Yes, hello everybody, and thanks for joining in this series of webinars. You'll be aware, no doubt, that the EUDR is subject to a probable 12-month delay. At the moment, the European Union and Council are figuring out between them to confirm that, and it is likely, I understand, that any amendments which have been tabled are not going to be successful. So we are looking at a 12-month delay in the enforcement start date. And so with all this uncertainty and other things going on, it's taken us slightly longer to get to where we are now, but we should all have some more time to still get ready in the next 13 months. So our EUDR modular voluntary standard has been available now, published on our website earlier in the summer, which you can get from the QR code on the right-hand side here. And for chain of custody certified organizations who take this extra scope, then this will give you a standard and you will adapt your management systems to work with it. And the standard describes all of the managing of input and output materials and the PEFC EUDR claims, which you would be able to make subject to going through the due diligence steps. And the standard has been aligned with the EUDR wording and requirements. So the partnership with LiveEO is to help with technology for gathering up especially geolocation data and due diligence evidence, and then taking this all the way through to submitting a statement if you are an operator or an EU trader who requires to do so. Now, next slide, please. So just a short visual, this is what the modular standard looks like. It's laid out in the very same way as the due diligence system section of the main chain of custody standard. And so these two work together, and in fact, it's backwards compatible with the main chain of custody standard. So by taking this scope extension, subject to obtaining this from your certification body, then you will be able to make onward EUDR aligned claims to your customers. And then if you choose to do so, take a technology package, which would help you in terms of managing all the associated data and information which you need to share with whichever customer you would like to share with. And next slide, please. So in terms of the PEFC approach, excuse me, PEFC itself will not be taking control of or trying to manage any dynamic data sets within our own database. Our database will be adapted to cater for the extended scope and the claims and the species and the products which certified organizations wish to take into this extended scope. Just a quick one in terms of timelines. Accreditation processes within the European accreditation area, the EA area, we understand will be complete by the end of January 2025. And so certification bodies will be gearing up to offer this product to you in the first quarter of 2025. If you're elsewhere in the world, accreditation bodies and certification bodies are already working together with each other. So we are expecting the first extended scope certificates to be issued in Q1 2025. And obviously the bigger organizations within supply chains who know that they're in a European bound supply chain will be passing this behavioral change down the supply chain. So if you're not quite ready yet, I would recommend that you start looking at this as soon as possible. And just the last slide, please. So here's a slide just to summarize in one graphic how the whole system works. Over the next 12 months on the sustainable forest management side, we will be aligning our national forestry systems in each PEFC country. And that's an internal process within PEFC International, so that certified material leaving PEFC certified forests will, towards the end of 2025 and into 2026 in some cases, be aligned to EUDR. If not, don't worry, it can still pass through the EUDR DDS module from a chain of custody point of view, and if successful, come out the other side. And in fact, the chain of custody module and the chain of custody system will be able to deal with any incoming material with or without any kind of certification claim and navigate the due diligence process through to an EUDR claim. the the technology. Tool number 4 there, and particularly from LiveEO, which Chris is going to go on to explain, is how you can harness this technology to grab all this data, keep it in one private and secure place, and then share it with your customer or your customers as you choose. And so we will be giving out more PEFC webinars into the future, and also joining in a subsequent LiveEO webinar. So at this point, I will hand over to Chris, and he's going to take you through some more of the detail. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rob. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit about how you actually go through the process of gathering the evidence and then actually performing risk assessment. So next slide, Andreas. So in terms of the information you need to get, this is all contained in Article 9 of the EUDR. So there's the information you have, the information you'll have today, such as the product quantity that you have of the relevant products, and the contact information of your suppliers and the buyers that you're selling onto. And then, of course, there's the information that you're going to need to get as part of the process of EUDR compliance. So you'll need to get the geolocations of all the plots of land. You'll need to know the country of production, of course, flowing from those geolocations. And then you'll have to get verifiable information that production has been in accordance with local legislation. And then the information that you will be able to infer from that as well is also that the products are deforestation-free. Next slide. So if you're looking at the requirements, you can see as well that there's also a split in Article 9 between whether or not your plot is under 4 hectares or over 4 hectares. Where it's under 4 hectares, you can provide a single point coordinate. Where it's over 4 hectares, you have to provide sufficient coordinates to describe the polygon, to describe the entire plot boundary. And so that's also goes a little bit to the data type that would be supported there. So on the point coordinates, just a simple lat-long pair, and on the polygon, GeoJSON polygon, multi-polygon types, which are what are supported by the EU information system. Next slide, Andreas. And then, of course, we see a significant number of challenges in getting access to that data. So in collaborating with your suppliers. So one of the biggest challenges we see is this issue of low awareness and low engagement. And the answer we have to that is to educate. So providing training to suppliers about the benefits of engaging with a platform like ours, and of course their obligations in providing data. Suppliers don't want to share contact details of sub-suppliers. Our answer to that is to reassure. One of the things that we've built into our system is the ability to provide geolocation data and to request geolocation data from your suppliers and their sub-suppliers, with only the tier 1 information being exposed to buyers, to make sure that you can reassure people that excessive data is not being shared. And then, of course, the issue that data needs to be verified and to be accurate. And of course, the answer to this is to standardize. So using a single tool to request the geolocation data for a large pool of suppliers. And next slide, Andreas. Thanks. And then if those are the challenges you have with the suppliers, then of course there's also the challenges you have in data collection. One of these is the need to digitize offline information. So the answer to that is to really simplify it. So one of the things we focused on in TradeAware is making the system really intuitive and providing it in a way that it requires very, very minimal training, very heavily focused on user experience and the user interface. That there's a lot of data to manage and you don't know all of your sub-suppliers. So again, that's the focus on unifying this data, providing a single platform to manage and store all of the geolocation data. And then, of course, the required information is siloed in different systems. And our answer to that is having a data strategy. So one of the key focuses there in our platform is the ability to integrate it with other existing systems. We recognize that data that's required for compliance with the EUDR is stored across many different systems. So the ability to then be able to integrate our platform with other platforms is a really key one. Next slide, Andreas. And then, yeah, how does our system simplify the process of geolocation collection for evidence gathering? So if you know them, you can manually draw the plots. So in our user interface, you can just draw the plot on the map, or you can bulk upload GeoJSON files as well. The other thing you can do is you can, of course, do that via API as well, rather than in our application, depending on your capacity to work with things like APIs. If you don't know them, but your suppliers know them, then you can delegate a request for plot information to a supplier, and they can in turn delegate it to their supplier, and so on and so forth, so that you have a sort of end-tier supplier data gathering process that can be done. And if your suppliers are already on TradeAware, then you can also just connect with them really easily. So we've built this like a sort of social network so that you can send a request to somebody and they can connect with you and start sharing the data that they already have there. And of course, another note against that is that we have a sort of very privacy-first approach. We're a company that's building for sort of modern privacy standards with SOC 2 compliance, one of the major sort of security certifications behind our company as well. Next slide, Andreas. Yeah, maybe just to explain that point a little more, you've probably already heard me use the term commercial network a few times. So what the commercial network is basically a really simple way for people to connect with their suppliers and to request geolocations for free. So the idea here is that we could have the operator here, the furniture maker, is able to send their request for information to their tier one, to their supplier, who may be providing the processed wood, and who in turn can send their request for information to a supplier who may be providing the logs, and so on and so forth. And the idea behind this is also then the way that contact details are rolled up is the contact details only roll up to the person who is immediately above you in the supply chain, the person who sent you the request. So that way you can get all of the data that you need for compliance, the plot data, but you don't end up sharing business secrets along the network that may be sensitive, and the risk of which often leads to people not engaging in actually gathering this data as well. Next, Andreas. So if that's how you go about the process of gathering information, then the next question is what do you make of it? How do you do a risk assessment? And that's what we'll talk about here. So if we've gone through this process of getting the information, then the next step is we need verifiable information that we're in compliance with local legislation, and of course that the products are deforestation-free. Next slide, Andreas. So the risk assessment is embedded in Article 10 of the regulation. So you have to analyze the data that you got as part of Article 9 and other documents to assess compliance risks. And then only products with no or negligible risk can be marketed or exported. So some of the considerations there are that wood products with valid licenses are considered produced legally. Annual documentation and consideration of risk are also something that's embedded into the regulation. And that, of course, you need to be able to maintain this data to provide to authorities, to the competent authorities for the regulation upon request. It's not something you actually need to submit as part of the due diligence process, as we sort of briefly spoke about earlier. But it's something that you need to retain in case of audit. And then, so how do we look at that for timber and wood-based products? So in terms of the legal side, this is part of where the collaboration with PEFC comes in. So we look at the PEFC EUDR due diligence standard. So if there's already data that's been gathered as part of that process that says there's a valid PEFC EUDR claim against a product, We look at the country that's being sourced from. We look at any valid PEFC certified claims as well, and then any other certification schemes, and sort of taking all that information together to be able to understand if there's legal compliance there. And then, of course, we also look at what's our specialization as a Earth observation company, which is the satellite imagery analysis. So we look at the usage of land at the cutoff date, and then look at changes over time to understand if we're looking at an existing timber plantation or whether we're looking at natural forest, to be able to really simplify that process of reviewing the plots that have been sent to you for compliance. And thanks, Andreas. So in terms of the legality assessment, what we've worked on with PEFC is really a sort of very sequential process. So the idea being that at each step, you can think about, are we introducing a negligible risk, a non-negligible risk? And then once at any point, if you find there's a non-negligible risk, then you can kind of stop the process, because then you've got something that you actually need to action. So, for example, if the deforestation assessment coming from the satellite analysis is successful, then your first point of call is coming in here and saying, has there been any concerns about corruption or document falsification? And then if there are, coming into which country it is, and then the next consideration would be about the tree species and whether or not that's linked to controversial activities, and then concerns about law enforcement, environmental protection, and then concerns about violation of human rights as well, sort of any violation of rights, land use, the third-party labor rights, international human rights, and then considerations around indigenous people and their involvement in the country of production. And then building on top of that, of course, as well as whether or not there's been any consultation, cooperation with those people. So the idea behind all of this is that if you can say no to these, then the no's are in the wrong place, I think, here on this chart. But if you can say no to these questions, then of course you can say there's only a negligible legal risk, and in that case, you're in a good place legally to be able to place the product on the EU market. And then, of course, you also have to take into consideration the risk of mixing, the risk of circumvention of the EUDR by mixing products from unknown origins as well. And again, if the answer to that is no, there's no risk, then the only other question you would have is just checking that there's no controversial sources, based on looking at PEFC website or other public sources to confirm that there's no concerns there. And then again, that results in you being in a position where you can say there's only a negligible mixing risk, and you're in a good place to confirm the legality obligations under EUDR. And then what that looks like in our application. So what happens there is we have a questionnaire that we've been building out with PEFC that you can use to put in your information and connect up with things like your existing PEFC claims that you can extract there and capture there, and be able to use that to drive your EUDR claims and eventually on to submitting into the EU information system as well. And then, and very much the same again of looking at how it looks for the risk of mixing with controversial or non-compliant sources. And then, of course, you can export those finished questionnaires and pass them on to any buyers that you may be operating with, and use that to evidence to them that you've checked the legality of the product. All right. So that's a real whistle stop of how we're approaching the problem, and I see we already have quite a few questions going on in the chat. I think one of the first ones, Rob, and I see you've answered this a little bit already, is about, and of course this is probably one of the most pressing ones for people, is where we're actually at with the delay to the regulation. I think, the EU sort of legislative process is a little difficult to get your hands on sometimes. So maybe you could say a little bit about where things are at with that.
Yeah, Chris, you want me to pick that one up, yeah?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yes, certainly, no problem. Yeah. So at the moment there was a vote on a series of amendments, and the actual delay itself in the Parliament, I think about 10 or 12 days ago. And some of the amendments were voted down, and some were put through. So at the moment, the Council and the Parliament now go into what's called a trialogue process, whereby they have to get agreement on everything by the 31st of December. And the word on the street in Brussels is that they will do their very hardest to make that happen. But the delay is very likely to be confirmed. However, the amendments, and one of the amendments was to introduce a no-risk category, is unlikely to succeed. So that's the latest information that I have. Technically, as somebody's pointed out in the chat, if this process fails, then because this legislation already exists, the EUDR could technically come into place on the 31st of December 2024. But I think all the actors in that game are trying to make sure that that does not happen. So the most likely scenario is that sometime in the next few weeks, in the run-up to Christmas, then the delay will be confirmed by the European Union. So if you haven't been to the EUDR EU webpage, please go there. You can sign up for email alerts, and then you will get the news straight to your inbox when it happens.
Great, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes exactly to the point that if the default scenario happens, I think Christmas is cancelled for everybody on this call probably. So we'll be watching the situation quite closely. And then I see there's also a question about whether or not you have to get the geodata from suppliers, and if that's the only way to verify the producer's location details. That is definitely a challenging aspect that the regulation introduces. But there are some aspects of the regulation that are maybe a little more open, like the point about the legal compliance side, for example, is perhaps a little vague still, saying adequately conclusive, verifiable. But when it comes to the geodata, that's actually quite specific, really. You need geodata, and you need to get that geodata from your suppliers to have it for all of the locations that you could be sourcing from that are in a product, and you need it in quite a specified format as well. So that's one of the ones that in the way that the law is drafted is pretty unavoidable, and we are working hard to make that as simple as possible for users to work with, so they don't have to so that's not as challenging as it might otherwise be. And then I see there's also a question here, Rob, about whether or not PEFC offers proof for compliance and land use concerning local parties and indigenous people. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, in fact, I did stick a written answer in, but as you were explaining, Chris, on the flows which are being designed inside the LiveEO software, the workflows are essentially mimicking the PEFC EUDR DDS modular standard. And the DDS modular standard was written to align with the requirements of the regulation. So within the standard itself, there are, I think, 6 tables within the risk assessment process. And as Chris was showing, if you work your way through the software, you are being prompted to answer these questions for your organization. And there's just while I'm unmuted here, there's quite a few questions here talking about how do you know which supply chain you're in? Are you in a European bound supply chain? How do you map your supply chains? Well, that's very much the responsibility of each actor in the supply chain. And of course, this regulation only legally applies to companies inside the EU who are either sourcing material from the 27 EU countries and their forests, or they are importing materials or part finished goods or finished goods from outside the EU. So wherever you are in the world, you need to start talking to your customers up the supply chain and down the supply chain to find out if your goods that you create or the materials which you sell are likely to end up in the European Union. And if so, it's then worth considering whether you want to collaborate with your customers and get into some kind of software solution here, because the software solutions link up all the actors in the supply chain and make it easier to pass the geolocation data and any other relevant due diligence evidence to the final customer. And as we all know, timber supply chains are very complex and they're not particularly vertical. So that's why this software is so useful to help you manage that challenge. So I've maybe answered one or two questions there, Chris. Sorry for that. So.
No, absolutely. Thanks there, Rob. And then maybe just to answer a couple of questions that are from the LiveEO side as well. There's a question there about whether or not we are monitoring degradation level at LiveEO. So our approach to the satellite analysis is we are looking at the plot from the cutoff date and then beyond to be able to make a determination if there might be any risk there that's visible from the satellite data. So that is a consideration you can use to drive your due diligence approach. Then there was also a question about integration with NAV. What I would say is that we have a public API that you can use to integrate with various platforms. So basically, we're pretty platform agnostic when it comes to integration. So whatever it is that you're using and that you want to integrate with, that's a capability that we are providing. And then, Rob, there's this question here as well, maybe about that I see you've answered, but maybe a little on the call about PEFC versus FSC certification. Just to maybe explain the difference there a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was in the middle of typing an answer there. So yes, FSC and PEFC are two completely different forest management and chain of custody schemes. We are the two biggest voluntary certification schemes in the world for forestry, and therefore we have similar, but not exactly the same rules. So in terms of, and the question was about labeling. So in terms of labeling, both PEFC and FSC have written rules, which you can read on our website or the FSC website, in terms of how you become certified against those schemes, and then how you make claims for the products which you're selling, and then if those products qualify to carry a physical logo or a label either on product or off product in terms of advertising. And the general rule, without getting into too much detail, for most solid wood products is that there must be at least 70% certified content for those products to carry a physical label. However, for recycled and other components such as paper and cardboard, etc., there's a whole range of different rules, which I'm not going to even try and explain now. It's much easier to go to the websites and download the rules and have a read of them. And in actual fact, within both of the schemes, you will find in reality quite a large proportion of PEFC certified and or FSC certified and or uncertified, or what we call controlled material within the final product, because there just simply isn't enough certified material to fit all the world demand at the moment. So sorry, it's a pretty vague answer, but yeah, we're two different schemes and we have two completely different sets of rules.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. And then I see some questions as well that are maybe a little more LiveEO based. So one here about how strictly to follow the polygon geolocation approach because of the contents having different contours. Yeah, this is quite a technical question around coordinate reference systems. The main thing I would say there is that, again, there's a sort of the main driver of the data you need is what's going to go into the EU system. I believe they're using WGS84 as a coordinate reference system. So you would need to be able to provide data in that format to be able to pass it on. And then there's also a question of how data is provided back from LiveEO. So what we're doing there is we're analyzing each individual plot of land that's uploaded into our system and providing risk against that. So you'd be able to make a determination based on that assessment as well. And then I also see there's a question here about which databases are available for investigating matters for legal due diligence. Rob, could you maybe answer a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. So within the PEFC EUDR standard, we do reference various public sources of information which are useful for companies to undertake their own due diligence. But our standard and other standards are not prescriptive in the sense that the responsibility lies with each company in the context of its own supply chain to actually carry out the due diligence, gather the necessary information, and then be responsible for it, which is no different from the EU timber regulations, which have been in place before the EUDR regulations are coming in. And in fact, the two regulations will overlap. LiveEO themselves obviously have GIS layers available, which they will continually develop into their product, and the questionnaire itself will guide companies through suggestions for how they might carry out the due diligence. And PEFC will be offering guidance as we go forwards through 2025 on any topics which people are finding difficult. But it's not in PEFC's DNA to try and be too prescriptive. The standard gives you a standard to meet, and then how you go about meeting that standard is very much up to your company's management systems, and the supply chain which you are in. And obviously, if you are sourcing from tropical countries with very complex forests, and then that's a completely different risk type than if you were, for example, just trading within Scandinavia. So it's very difficult to generalize in terms of how complicated a due diligence risk assessment process has to be. So I hope that helps.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. And then there's a question here about the process used to map supplier data to the final product. I think that's one that we're able to help to a certain extent with being able to map your suppliers as part of the commercial network. But the question here about modeling consumption at production side and following things around that way, we're not providing a full traceability solution here. So that's one that if you wanted to model to that level, you would need you would need to use some different approaches. But I would also just emphasize that with the EUDR as well, that you don't need to have such a perfect one-to-one relationship between the product that you have and the plots you're reporting. So one of the things you can do here is do things like a declaration in excess. If you have multiple plots, and it could the product you have could be the product of multiple of those, then as long as they're all compliant, you would be able to submit for all of them. So again, it's something to have a good correlation between what you are submitting and what's actually in the product, but it doesn't have to be sort of perfectly one-to-one. Sorry, Rob, did you want to go? Yeah.
Can I just add something onto that to Bryce's question there about consumption at production sites? The thing to remember here with EUDR is that there are more risk categories than just timber. There is soy, there is coffee, cocoa, rubber, etc., and cattle, and the products of cattle. And in the forestry certification world, we do not do what's called mass balance. So some of the other commodities have to deal with this mass balance issue. And mass balance is where you take uncertified, uncontrolled material and you balance it against controlled or certified material. So the way that PEFC and indeed FSC chain of custody works is that nothing can be mixed until it's controlled. And so companies have to make sure their management systems and their production processes can keep separate and control any EUDR compliant material from any non-EUDR compliant material. So if as a company you take the extra standard, the extra scope, and you adapt your management systems and you are controlling to the level of EUDR alignment, then mixing at the production site and using things like a percentage and credit methods is not an issue because it's not mass balance in the traditional sense. But it's very important that companies, especially outside the European Union, understand where their materials are going. And if they are going to an EU-bound supply chain, then they are being controlled to the level to which is EUDR compliant, which does talk to a question which was asked earlier in terms of, and I'm praising the question, but it's essentially, why would someone outside the EU want to take up the certification and take up this technology? Well, simply because by doing so, you are opening up options for frictionless trade. And if you're not, then the customers inside the EU are looking for low risk EUDR compliant materials. So if you don't gear up for this, then the risk is that you can lose out on customers.
Thanks, Rob. I see there's quite a few questions about traces on here as well. I also thought it was quite interesting as well that we've gone through a few different names here with the EU, that the regulation talks a lot about information system, and then the website page talks about the deforestation registry, and of course the system itself is called traces, but all of those being the place where you're going to submit a due diligence statement. Yes, we are building an integration to traces. We built an integration with the test system that the EU made available, so that you can submit into that system as and when it's fully available and ready to receive those. There's a couple of questions here that sort of specifically go to the functionality of traces itself. So whether or not you're able to grab input data from GeoJSONs from traces, based on the way the API is structured currently, it's not possible. So I have a sort of slight assumption that maybe it's an oversight in the way that it's structured, because you're able to see the data in the user interface, but you're not actually able to grab it via the API. So I think that may be something that the EU fixes eventually. But when they do, it would be our intention to utilize that as well, to simplify the process of gathering GeoJSONs. The other thing that's maybe relevant to mention there is that there is an option to make the GeoJSONs confidential as well, to make geolocations confidential. And with that would limit our ability to do that as well. As I understand, that sort of came about after a few producers specifically complained about the visibility of their supply chain there. And maybe just to come back on the question as well about degradation and the cutoff date, that is something we're looking at, the evolution after the cutoff date as well. So the thing that we're looking at is always when we have a plot that's uploaded, we're looking in relative to the cutoff date, and then after that point, so that we can check that if somebody's uploaded something that wasn't problematic at the cutoff date, if there's any change in that status over time as well. And then there's a question on whether satellite photos could be different per satellite company and what's correct. It's an interesting question. I mean, it's very, maybe as people in the geospatial space would be fond of telling you, you shouldn't mix up the map and the terrain. And so, you know, there's the sort of, which is correct is probably not always the most simple thing to say, or to say that there is a correct one. I think the way we view it is that that through LiveEO and through other companies that we know are working in the space, the main point is to provide data that focuses you on the ones that are the most challenging to look at or the most important to look at. And so what we want to do with our analysis is to, where there are cases that are capable of automation that we can look at with the satellite data we're using, and as I think is raised in the question, there are different different resolutions of satellite data, but using that data to make a determination of whether or not this is something you need to investigate further, or whether or not it's something that can be pretty easily assessed. So it's not a simple thing to say that one data source is going to be correct. I would be very skeptical of anybody coming to the market telling you they have a correct data source. It's definitely more sort of degrees of accuracy. And one of the things that we focused on here at LiveEO is trying to make that, make our data sources as accurate as possible. But I still would caution people against any data source that's going to come on the market is not going to be 100% accurate. And you'll need to, there will be instances where you need to look into it and understand what's actually going on in the background there. So I think that that just about covers all the questions we've got, and maybe Piero, I could hand over to you to sum up and wrap up for us.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Rob. Once again, you can sign up to our solution here in the QR code and the URL there. We will be following up with this recording and material, and we'll keep you up to date on upcoming webinars. We will address all the remaining bits of this compliance journey, including how to submit a due diligence statement. And we invite you to have direct conversations with any of us. You have our contact details on this slide. We hope this session was informative, and we'll be seeing you soon. Thank you very much.